am Peter Coleman. I am faculty at Columbia on, I guess now 3 faculties, TC, Earth Institute, and NECR faculty. And direct the International Center for Cooperation and Conflict Resolution here, and co-direct with Besch, Fisher, Yoshida, the Advanced Consortium on Cooperation, Conflict, and Complexity, which Krister is the assistant director of, and Nat is gone. Oh, that's over there. I thought Nathaniel is here as well as a program manager. John Mazzaro, Josh Fisher, and who else am I missing? Is that the crew? Nick. Nick Redding as well. So we have the staff here as well. And so this will be fun, I think. This is, we're here to sort of talk about the field of peace and conflict studies and really the future of the field. And this is an expanding field, which is the good news and the bad news. There's obviously a lot of conflict and a lot of need for innovative solutions to conflict. I think our U.S. Supreme Court rulings show us that there needs to be alternative ways to solve problems. And the field has grown in different places. The UN in the past 5 years has really come to recognize and embrace the need to understand mediation. How does the UN do mediation? So they've passed a resolution and they've put out a report and they've really organized some high-level sessions and panels to take a serious look at mediation to understand the role that that plays in their work and really in the international community's work more generally. So there's a lot of energy around that in the international domain. This is also an area growing in business, growing in education, in schools, growing in communities. And so what we're here tonight to talk about is to share a little bit about some of the careers that reflect, I think, some of that diversity. We have a motley crew of esteemed alumni from various programs here. They represent now, I think in their work, very different areas. It's a very eclectic set of folks, and I'll give you some general sense of them. But their work is eclectic, and it does, again, reflect the nature of the field of conflict studies. The UN, for example, when it talks about conflict resolution, it primarily talks about mediation, but they don't define it because it means 100 different things to 100 different people. And so some of that you'll see reflected in the kind of work that this group does. And so we have Jenny Besch as well. Jenny is going to facilitate the group tonight conversation. So let me give you a little background on these folks. Jenny is the director of the Westchester and Rockland Mediation Center of Cluster Incorporated. You'll explain what that is, right? Okay. And she's since 1998, is that right? My goodness. Certified mediator, state certified trainer, advanced training in community mediation. All right, ready for this? She has advanced training in community mediation, parent-child mediation, custody visitation mediation, divorce mediation, child permanency mediation, lemon law arbitration, employment discrimination mediation, and victim offender mediation, and restorative justice group conferencing. Right? So that even there shows you a little bit of the eclectic nature of the field. She holds a master's degree in oversight from Columbia, where she also did her undergraduate work, and is a co-author of Parenting Through Divorce, a Collaborative Negotiation, which is a training designed to assist parents and children adjust to those circumstances. So Jenny will be here to moderate in a second. And let me introduce some of the, I guess, is this in order? Maybe this is in order of, to my right, is Alon Hillel-Tuch, who graduated from the Negotiation and Conflict Resolution Master's Program in 2011, and is co-founder and chief financial officer of something called Rocket Hub, which he's going to talk about. But again, this is one of those kind of very innovative projects that came out of his experiences here and his background. But he really is working in the emergency field of crowdsource funding, using technology and what he calls social ritual to help people interact, communicate, exchange, and share ideas and find support and funding for those ideas. His additional focus is on education and awareness, having lectured at social conferences such as TEDx, as well as Fortune 500 companies and universities. He's testified on the Jobs Act in front of the Oversight and Government Reform Committee in the U.S. Congress, published 3 well-respected white papers on the Jobs Act, that received critical acclaim from government, press, and regulatory groups, and hosted the White House's Jobs Council at Rocket Hub's headquarters as well. He had his BA from Hamilton and his MSc from Columbia University. So, why don't you, let's get some applause going. So Enid is next on my right. Enid Portuguez, or her pronunciation of her last name is? Portuguez. This is so beautiful. Graduated from NECR last year or 2 years ago? 2012. 2012. She is Digital Media Officer for the World Federation of the United Nations Associations. So she has a background in a different area. She covered entertainment and style topics as a reporter, writer, and editor for publications as the LA Times, LA Daily News, InStyle, and the Daily Beast. But currently, she's responsible for developing and managing the World Federation of United Nations Associations digital presence through its website, social media platforms, e-newsletters, and online campaigns. So please welcome Enid. So Ray, Yunzi Tan, is next. She is a former student and a current colleague and collaborator on research. We've known each other for a long time. Sorry?
I think about 9 years.
9 years, at least, yeah. She's now assistant professor of negotiation and conflict management at the School of Public and International Affairs, College of Public Affairs at the University of Baltimore. As a current full-time member in this program, she teaches graduate courses on research methods, approaches to managing conflict, and organizational conflict management. Her research includes focus on diversity training, team conflict management, which was the area of her dissertation, where she created a theoretical model on how teams negotiate conflict and the value of negotiating conflict within teams, as well as looking at interventions and systems in an organizational context. Prior to this, she had taught as an adjunct professor for us at the ICCCR and in the social org program here, but also as a very experienced organizational development consultant. So please welcome Ray back. Michelle Jackson is a graduate of the NECR program in 2011 and is founder of something called Snap Indigo. And she'll talk more about what that is, but she describes it as a creative collaboration consultancy. So for the last 20 years, she's worked for Fortune 500 companies, community organizations, and entrepreneurs moving ideas to reality. She suggests that the program, the NECR Master's Program, gave her the theoretical understanding of conflict resolution and how it applies to her interest in moving ideas to reality. So the connection between conflict management and innovation in different contexts. Her recent projects include work for a major advertising agency as well as for AC4, Earth Institute on Cosmopolis 2045, which is a program that she's working on with Beth Fisher-Yoshida that has some of its origins in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. She also serves on various not-for-profit community boards focusing on the health and well-being of New York City residents. So please welcome Michelle Jackson. And last but not least is Krister Lowe. Krister, we've known each other for many years. We won't talk about how long, but it's been a long time. I met Krister when he was a master's student here at TC. He worked at the center for years. He did research with us. He was a research coordinator, and then eventually got his PhD in this program. One of Krister's claims to fame was that he began the PhD program here the first morning of the PhD program in our research lab at the center was September 11th at 9 a.m. 2001, yeah. 2001. So that's what launched his academic career, I think was 9/11. Today he's an organizational consultant, organizational psychologist, and a partner at C Global Consulting, which is based in New York City. He has 2 decades of experience providing training, facilitation, consulting, and coaching interventions for organizations in more than 25 countries around the globe. He's worked extensively throughout the United Nations system worldwide, currently leads a team of consultants providing specialized solutions in areas of conflict resolution, performance management, team effectiveness, and leadership development. He holds an MA and PhD from here to the Social Work Psych program. Is a certified mediator, a master trainer, and a father, a recent father, right? So please welcome Krister. So I'll have Jenny come up and run this show, but I guess what I wanted to say is, first of all, thank you all for coming. Proud of all of you for what you did here, what you continue to do, and how you grow the field. My mentor, who was a man named Mort Deutsch, who was one of the founders of this field, really believed in the power of growing leaders. And I think these are representatives of leaders in the field who are really going off and making a high impact. So it would be great to listen to them and hopefully stimulate your own thinking about your next steps, right? I guess I also want to say that the alumni network that is represented here and represented also in the room to some degree is something that AC4, the consortium, is really trying to support and enliven these days. To that end, there's a survey that you have. So if you could please fill that out and put it somewhere.
Yes, there'll be a box on the piano.
There'll be a box on the piano, so just fill it out. It's just asking you, what should we build so you would come? But it is something we're really interested in, is staying connected with people who are doing great things and connecting them to others. So please engage with us in the future. Okay? So thanks very much. Thank you, panel. Let's go. Jenny?
Oh, it's so nice to be here today, and I'm not going to spend any time really on myself, except that now I have to explain what Cluster is. Cluster is the umbrella organization under which the community dispute resolution centers run in my area. Cluster stands for Communities Linked in Urban Strategies to Effect Renewal. There are no congregations or communities that are linked together in any kind of urban strategy, and I haven't found any renewal in Yonkers. But the mediation centers are a very exciting place to work, and they give you access to all kinds of interesting people with interesting problems. And so if any of you are interested at some point in mediation, plain, straight mediation in the community area, please feel free to speak to me at the reception afterwards. I see a lot of familiar faces here, people I've taught at Columbia, and I'm thrilled to see you, and lots of new and engaged, interested people. So without further ado, we're going to turn to our panel and ask them to introduce themselves to you more fully and talk about the work that you're doing now and how the work that you learned to do here has helped you. Alon, should we begin with you?
Sure. I guess I just got put on the left side, so I'm going to be stuck with it.
Well, we can back and forth.
Yeah, so my name is Alon, and I actually started a company with a fellow colleague from the NECR program, Brian Meese, who wasn't able to make it here today. And what we created was a platform that allowed people to leverage their social capital to do whatever it is that they wanted to do. Relevance really becomes that which their own group believes in. And we've seen a lot of different projects launch in the last 5 years, raising lots of funds, but really what we noticed is people are applying these funds to do something. And I'll talk about examples later, how that's actually disrupting regions around the world. We're actually working in 180 different countries in collaboration with the U.S. State Department. We've had women's shelters be launched in Morocco without government support, which is kind of disrupting a lot of the social situations that are out there. And we've had tech companies launched in the United States and regions that don't have access to capital or typically innovation. But that's kind of what I do now. And the Jobs Act is just an interesting thing that we can talk about it at some point, but it had to do with a certain group of individuals having access to investment opportunities or innovation and legally cutting out over 95% of the U.S. demographic. And what we did is overturn an 80-year-old rule that allows now everybody to have the same access to opportunities. And the reason we did that I could talk about, and a lot of what I learned in the program was about to that.
Great, we're going to come back to you on that, because I'm sure there are going to be a lot of questions as well as, I have some, I've got out there. You want to pick it up from there and tell a little bit about some of your work and how what you did here led you to that?
I coordinate the digital media marketing and communications for this nonprofit, and I feel it's really bridged my previous career with what I've learned in NECR, because I wanted to continue doing something that involved writing and communications, but not for a media organization exactly, directly. I wanted to kind of shift from being an observer to someone who can actually help organizations convey their message better, or to use online and technology to do that, to spread their mission and their work. And learning that every day is my first time working for a nonprofit full-time, so I'm learning the challenges. I'm sure everyone that's worked with a nonprofit knows. But it's also exciting to work with the UN, but not for the UN. And it's to see that civil society perspective in the work that they do. And I can also definitely talk about career change, which is a very scary but exciting thing. So I look forward to sharing my experience on that.
Oh, that's great. Great. All right. A little introduction of yourself and the work you're doing now.
Sure.
Well, first of all, good evening. It's really nice to be here and to be part of this event. So as Peter mentioned, I currently hold a tenure track assistant professor role at the University of Baltimore within the School of Public and International Affairs. I always get that confused because it's SIPA. But we call it SPIA over there. And specifically, I am on faculty in the Masters of Science program in Negotiations and Conflict Management, which I guess, in other words, it's the, you could consider it as the Maryland counterpart of the NECR program here. It's the first ever graduate program in negotiation and conflict management in that area. And it has about, I guess, every year on average 100 to 120 students, mostly working professionals. And so we offer, largely evening classes to cater to the students' needs and, lifestyles. In terms of their interests, I think in some ways very similar to the students we get in the NECR program. A lot of students are interested in the issues of conflict and conflict resolution from various fields and sectors, particularly in public administration and nonprofit sectors, just given its location. Now, sort of switching gears, in terms of the work that I do at the University of Baltimore, I teach graduate courses, as Peter mentioned, in research methods, approaches to managing conflict, and of course that's very similar to what we call managing conflict in organizations here within the Columbia Network. I also do research. One of my primary areas of research intersects the area of diversity, training, and conflict in organization and context. It certainly follows from my dissertation work, which is on diversity in conflict management within teams in organizational context. As a, I guess, early career academic, I'm also working on developing some new research interests, particularly around conflict management interventions and training effectiveness in organizational context. And to that end, I'm actually partnering with one of my panelists here, Krister, Lowe, to look at some of the training programs and interventions that he and his team has been working on at the United Nations to see if we can get some productive research efforts going on right there. In addition to that, as Peter mentioned, I'm also continuing to work with Peter and his team on some of the research and the exciting work that's continuing to be done here at Columbia. So I think that sort of reinforces the point about keeping your networks and connections alive, particularly as an academic. I think that's certainly key. Let's see, what else? I think that's about it for now.
I can assure you we'll be coming back.
Yeah, I'm sure. All right.
That was great. My name is Michelle Jackson, and for the last 20 years I've been working in advertising production And so I take things that Ray is working on, or Krister, and then I try to figure out how to communicate that to people who don't live in the academic world. So that means I'm dealing with visual content, with experiential content, and moving those ideas forward. So I do that in the context of being an advertising producer, but then what the program actually made me realize is how to actually step into ambiguity and be okay with it, and know that you can manage whatever the situation is, so that then all these interesting cross-sector conversations come up. So I think I'll leave it at that for right now. But I have a very strong interest in sustainability and sustainable cities. So things like greening the city, how do people get along, how is there peace in the city, are interests of mine that I'm trying to sort of fold into what I've been doing.
So good evening, everyone. Pleasure to be here with you. I'm Krister Lowe, and just an honor to be on the panel this evening. And you know, for me, TC and the Conflict Center here was a real sort of birthplace for me in terms of my evolution in this field. And I actually didn't come to TC to study conflict resolution, and I wound up as a first-year master's student not being able to get in the course I wanted. And so somebody said, why don't you take the basic practicum in conflict resolution? And I begrudgingly signed up. I didn't really want to do it. It was on Monday nights over in Barnard for 4 hours. I'm like, 4 hours every night? Kidding me? But anyways, it was a really experiential, transformational course, and I just caught the bug, and I wound up doing the whole certificate in conflict resolution, became a mediator, and met my business partner in mediation, and I went to the Bronx to do my internship. He went to Washington Heights. And then we wound up getting pulled in by a mediation center in Washington Heights to do work with middle school kids. And so we had a program in 9 middle schools on peace and conflict resolution. And that was sort of where we really cut our teeth as trainers. And even to this day, you know, training 35, 11-year-olds in Washington Heights, still are probably the most challenging groups that I've ever trained. You know, what I learned there is if you can hook people in the first 3 or 4 minutes, then you can keep them for 45 minutes. But if you miss those kids in the first 5 minutes, forget about it. You'll be fighting this uphill battle. You know, we weren't trained teachers, so. And one of our trainers is really funny. She said after like 3 months of going to teach the kids, she's like, today's the first day that I didn't vomit before going in. The anxiety was so intense for her that it was like a huge threshold when she reached the point of being able to go in and not, you know, her anxiety overwhelm her. But anyways, I met my business partner, Tony Hacking there. We started a firm, Seagull Consulting. You know, started a PhD on 9/11, which was a really symbolic, intense, you know, way to start the program, and went out to after doing a lot of work in schools, and went out to Bosnia and got involved in a long-term peace building and peace education program, mainly in the education sector, and that led me to back to the UN, and in 2004 got involved in some long-term conflict resolution capacity building in the UN system, a lot in the Secretariat, and then into peacekeeping, and then into the agencies, and so. Really for the last 10, 12 years, really intense work in the UN, sort of all over the place, doing all kinds of things that I learned here. So mediation, coaching around conflict, a lot of training, team interventions, large and small group interventions, and so really the tools that we received here, but just putting them all to use, and then trying to innovate along the way and bring more creative methods along using arts and trying to blend interventions. I was doing a mediation last week where I was blending mediation with coaching with a group of 6 leaders that I was mediating. And so, whether the work is straight up conflict resolution or facilitating a team, I think the skills that we learned here just are using the conflict tools all the time. And so I think for me now, I still do a lot of conflict work. I think after 10 years, when you do a lot of that, it can take a toll on you. So there's, I think, like a secondary bit of impact, or I wouldn't say trauma, but you take some impact from those interventions. And I definitely have ramped down a little bit my work there, trying to focus a little bit more upstream on helping build capacity before people really get into these tough, cases which take a lot of intense, intervention to try to get out of. So conflict's a lot easier to get into than out of, and I think we could do a lot more work upstream, not so much preventing conflict, but building healthy, resilient, dynamic systems. And so anyways, that's a little snapshot, and nice to be here.
Quite a number of interesting snapshots here today. One of the things I think just this initial piece pointed out is what Peter was talking about, the breadth of this field, the idea that what you take here can be morphed, changed, adapted, and you have to be able to tolerate a little ambiguity. But inside of that ambiguity is opportunity for transition, change, not only personally, but for your communities and your society. So I wonder if we could focus a little bit on that, on the notion of transition, and what it was like for you, and what do you think it would be like for those that are looking to make that transition? What do you think they need to hold inside themselves to accept the ambiguity and the work towards transition? Any one of you. I'm not going to make you do every single one.
I can, but I don't think.
Whatever. Just who.
I can speak to that. So, like I said, my background was in advertising, and I went back for conflict resolution. And one of the things that I came up against is sort of the, like, how does that work? Why does it matter? And so it's actually been a process since I graduated, trying to figure out exactly what that means. And what I've recognized is that it really is about managing people, and the idea that moving into situations where things aren't comfortable is actually interesting if you can manage that process. And with that takeaway, I've become much more involved in exploring what that means. So starting in advertising, working with the ICCCR on a project around communication and sustainable peace, trying to figure out what that means, doing some community building, and then applying it to, I do a lot of community work in my neighborhood of Harlem, where I've lived for the last 10 years, and focusing on how to make the community not necessarily stronger, but how to work with people and see what happens, because there's a lot of change happening there, and we're right in the middle of all of it. So what does that mean? It could be anything from community gardening. I sit on the community advisory board for Sydenham Clinic, which is on 118. I work with a not-for-profit doing, as a board member called Kids Creative, and we work with kids, teaching them how to deal with conflict resolution and performing arts. So it's really like being okay, not knowing, is really how I'm moving through. Most recently, I'm trying to figure out how to fold things together, so bringing the sustainability piece into corporate America and what that looks like.
Wonderful, thanks so much. You know, one of the things I notice is you're saying that so often when we first start out in school, people will tell you, keep your eye on the ball, don't lose focus, and what I hear you saying, especially as you're talking to groups of people that are transitioning, is, yeah, you keep your eye on the ball, but notice how many balls are out there. Notice the whole perspective, and that's a challenge, managing those two things, yeah.
And I think that's actually a very interesting point, because I think one of the things that I'd learned was this adaptability and how to see things, and adding in different layers of understanding instead of just seeing something this way, like seeing it on a systems level, or understanding that it might be, an individual conflict the person's having, or is it an organizational conflict, and kind of being able to analyze a situation in a very different way than I did before. So it's exciting.
Very interesting.
I think for me, one thing that I realized was that my journey through the program was just as dynamic as the conflicts that we were studying. And it could change from the beginning until the very end. I came into it thinking that I was going to do a complete career change. I was going to give up everything that I had done before and completely start anew and learn these new skills and just, hit the ground running. And life, like give me the face, practical things, started to sink in, and I realized, oh my God, there's no way I can just go from being on a red carpet covering some celebrity event to, the DRC. Like, you can, I guess. Like, you can't, people have done things like that, but I personally had to deal with the reality that I probably wasn't going to be able to do that, in the time frame that I wanted to, and be able to, and in the area of life that I was in. So what I did was I just embraced what I loved about my old career, what skills, what strengths I had, and how could I bring that to a career that could incorporate conflict resolution and international issues. So it took that overwhelming sense of like having to make this huge career change and making it just accessible and apply to me, and not make it this expectation, but more about, well, how can I use the skills that I've developed and have used for years and apply that differently. It was a reframe, I guess, to use to use the terminology, but it was an actual reframe of my life and career that it didn't have to be this complete 180, but it could just make little tweaks here and there, and it had to do with a lot of self-awareness, which everyone's learning, and it made it definitely less scary to kind of think about what I did have versus what I don't have and what I needed to earn in this short amount of time in order to get somewhere.
I mean, for me, it was very, I should have mentioned this, but I'm going to be on the blacklist for saying this, but before I started the program, I was an investment banker for about 4 years.
Oh, you're right, you are. No,
I was not one of the bad guys. I believe. There's no way of really knowing. People started playing with stuff they didn't understand, and that inherently is part of the issue, right? And then when I started this program, for me, it was not about I want a career shift. It was I want to learn more about myself, and I want to build a toolkit that I can apply to the things that, on a selfish level, interest me. And everybody, in my opinion, behaves intrinsically at some point with a sense of self, right? So let's develop out that toolkit and let's see what happens from it. And then during the program, I had within my own system this moment of awareness of who I am, how I interact with people, what is it that they need from me if there is a need, how do we actually interact and what's the dynamic around that? And then after a while I said, wow, that's actually really, really exciting. I didn't realize that life was so rich. It's kind of morbid to say, right? Once you actually get to that point where you realize, hey, that's what's interesting to me, I want to do this in a professional capacity, that's where I took that leap, left my job after the program, and started something new with somebody, and we just started having a lot of fun. We still have fun from time to time, but there's also a lot of hard parts to it. Sometimes the academic side kind of kills me because I don't go into things with the surgical precision that an institution like this has. It's kind of like fishing with dynamite sometimes. So the only reason why we called the Jobs Act is we know that people in Congress don't vote no on jobs. It's the only reason why we use that acronym. It worked, but you have to realize it's not necessarily a sustainable thing. So it's also balancing the practical side where we don't always have the time to sit back and reflect and talk about life with everybody. That's the softer side of things that you sometimes have to just let go of and hone in on what's the core of what you're trying to accomplish. And that's been actually one of the hard things after the program for me is being in something for a few years, not being told, but exploring different tools and how to follow it, and then realize you can't actually do step 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. You have to do step 1, then 8, then 2, then 7, and then you're done. And accepting that was actually very tough.
Interesting. What a transition you made. But you also talk a lot about self-knowledge and the opportunity to gain that through a program like this or other programs. And May, I wonder if you and Krister can talk a little bit about the need and the emphasis from the educational point of view of helping people come to a place of self-knowledge about the work that they want to do, and especially when it comes to groups. Because of course, that's a little different than the individual, isn't it?
Sounds like I should go first with that. I guess a couple of thoughts come to mind, and I'm going to tie it in to your earlier question about transition. Specifically speaking from my own personal experience, I think one of the things that I took away sort of reflecting upon the transition I went through coming out of the PhD program last May and into, the academic role, which I started last August. I mean, it wasn't a relatively long period of time, but I think what happened for me, or at least the takeaway from that was that the importance of making room for, thank you. All right, I'll try to project my voice. The importance of making room for serendipity. And this sounds kind of, sort of deviant from the narrative that we're going, but I bring that up because whenever I reflect back on, how I made that student to faculty journey, I think this is probably not, it's something that not everyone likes to hear because we all like to be in control, right, of our, paths and actions and behaviors. But I think in some part, we do have to make space for opportunity and possibility, and to recognize that, because for me, when I was coming out the PhD program, I mean, to be honest, I didn't think that I was going to go into an academic career just primarily because I know the reality of the competitiveness of an academic job, and also specific to this field, an academic, a faculty role that focuses in this field is not something like, a faculty position in management or organizational psychology where there are, sort of established networks or certain processes that PhD candidates would go through to land academic roles. So for me, serendipity actually played a large role because when I was actively looking for jobs, as I was approaching my graduation, I actually chanced upon the job opening, which is my current job, online. And when I read the description, what dawned upon me was that this description basically described my CV, in the sense that it was looking for someone with a PhD in conflict resolution or related discipline like social psychology, organizational psychology, someone who had some teaching experience. It was a position for assistant professor, so some teaching experience in the area. But in addition to that, it was also looking for someone with applied experience in organizational development and change management. So for me, I would have never thought that a job description like that in the academic realm existed. So it was definitely a pleasant surprise. And then when I, went through the process, the job talk and so forth, everything went, I would say relatively smoothly. And so even to this day, I'm wrapping up my first year at University of Baltimore, and I can still say that I still can't quite believe that I'm in this role. And the funny thing was, when I first started the program 8-9 years ago, I did come into the PhD program with the intention of, focusing on conflict, going into an academic career, focusing on the area, conflict resolution, because I was exposed, and the reason why I was interested in that was because of my prior research experience at the undergraduate level that got me interested in the topic. And then over the years throughout the program, and I say that lovingly because I think one of the unique things about the PhD program in social organizational psychology at Teachers College is that we are not, it's a program that really encourages students to, sort of develop the scholar and practitioner competencies and capabilities, and throughout my time in the program that, I was really exposed to a breadth of, knowledge and expertise and experiences that led me to wander away from this original, this initial aspiration to go into an academic career in conflict resolution. But somehow, one way or another, as I mentioned earlier, that today, I am in the position where I had, thinking back 9 years ago, was exactly where I wanted to be. Well, okay, not exactly, but for the most part, it fits the mold. So I think that goes back to my earlier point that, you know, we sometimes we overlook the value of serendipity and the importance of keeping an open mind and the possibilities for non-linear and dynamical ways of getting to where you want to be. So that's my spiel on the transition component.
I'm going to come back about some of this, but that whole point about keeping yourself open, not only yourself, but your vision of the future seems as though it's critical. Maybe you would not have even gone online to look had you stayed so narrow in your focus, but opening up gave you an opportunity to see it. Krister.
Yeah. So I'll just piggyback a little bit on what Ray's saying around serendipity and sort of the emergence. When I look back on my start in the field really in 2000, when I look back now, all the sort of steps in the road to how I got to where I am today, it makes a lot of sense. And it's like, I can see how one thing led to the next and it's really clear. But each stage along the journey, it was the fear of the unknown, a lot of, you know, being out in the ocean and not knowing which way land was at every step of the way. And I think, you know, for me, because conflict resolution is not a field where, or at least when I was coming up, really defined tracks. It's like having an entrepreneurial sort of spirit to that, I think really helped a lot. And like, you know, for me, it took about 3 or 4 years before I really got my first big breakthrough in the field. And so, a lot of volunteering early on, doing stuff for free, offering trainings for free. And, you know, I think in the first year of our business, we made $500. You know, we were like, yes, we got one job in a year, hustling out there, you know, a lot of free work, you know. And then year 2, it's like, okay, we made $10,000. All right, we're building some momentum. You know, and I was in the doctoral program, and I think that helped a little bit, not having to turn it into a success overnight. And then by year 3, we landed, you know, our first big contract, and then by year 4, we landed something big enough that we're like, I think we're going to make it. But I think what was great about that period of not having it too easy was, you know, being in the space of just experimentation, trying to draw on your resourcefulness and creativity to always keep trying. I think at the end of the day, if you really love what you do, you're going to make it. And it's just a matter of, do you get your break sooner or later? But I almost feel like, you know, if you're not tested enough, do you really want it? And, you know, do the forces of the universe really feel like you're worthy of getting it? And so, you know, you got to hustle and go after it. And so I think, you know, the takeaway for me about how that leads to work with groups now, and so, you know, the process of transformation and growing yourself and risk-taking is really what I'm asking of my clients when they're in conflict. And, you know, being in a place just to sit with them, to create a climate where they can be safe and start to let go of the threat, to bring the threat level down so we can shift from trying to fix people and fix problems to a more discovery stance. And when the discovery comes in and the learning comes in and the creativity comes in, that's when conflict really becomes exciting and interesting. And it can take a long time to get there, right? In the mediation I was doing last week, it took a couple of days, 2 days to 3 days before the lights of discovery and hopefulness started to emerge. It was dark in that room for a couple of days, but then it starts to emerge, you know, and as the darkness recedes, there's more moments of that light coming. And so I think, you know, fundamentally for me, conflict resolution is a process of education, which is about learning and change and insight into oneself. I don't think I can think of any conflicts where we've been helpful in people resolving them, where people don't fundamentally change through the process. Because the ones where we just fix stuff and then we move on are really not sustainable. They tend to fall apart later. But the ones where people actually learn and discover themselves and each other are the ones that really, you know, pan out. So I think both in terms of my journey, that feels like that emergence theme, but also in work with clients, you know, just being in that space of allowing for the discovery to happen.
And it sounds like empathy is developed through the process that you went through to empathize with the process others are going through at the same time. And sometimes it doesn't always feel like that when you're being asked to make changes and somebody else has made all the changes and they've forgotten how important it is.
Yeah, and I think just building on that, you know, like people have a couple of years of conflict and then they get in the room, you're there with them for maybe I was with this group for half days for 4 days in a row. And it's amazing to see a couple of years of tough conflict, people actually can let it go in a few days. And so it's tough being in the room, sitting there for hours, just allowing people the room to let go. But, you know, if you step out a little bit, 4 days isn't a lot when they actually come out healing and actually maybe building something interesting that they discovered as a result, although there was years of, you know, hardship that led to that point. So I think, you know, just being in that place of patience for a long time is really, you know, helpful. But, you know, it takes space to grow and to create that holding environment. Yeah.
Absolutely, absolutely. I want a time check here, because I don't know when we're supposed to go to the group, because I've been so interested, I completely lost track of
Why
time.
don't we take some questions in the audience now?
We should turn to the audience.
Let's do that.
Shoot, I had so many of my own questions. But it doesn't matter. This is your night, and I want you to have an opportunity to ask these folks questions, ask them anything you want. So, can we have some voices from the peanut gallery out there? Now, don't all speak at once. So, we have a gentleman here.
Yeah, I just wanted to, I wanted to hear, Ray, I wanted to hear your piece on groups. It sounded like you were going to get there at some point, and you had kind of something formulated in regards to the transition.
Just so that you can hear, this young man has asked Ray to talk a little bit about groups, because we sort of moved off of it, but I think that's an area of interest for him. So,
Yeah, I mean, actually, I would say that, you know, a lot of my reflections and thoughts around that would also echo with some of the themes that Krister had already mentioned in terms of, you know, that transformative learning process that you go through, whether it's you within a part of a group or outside of that and watching a group, you know, going through some sort of transitional period. Let's see if there's anything else I wanted to add. So, just to get a little bit more elaboration in terms of the question, because one of the things that I've been thinking about, you know, as I was thinking about that question, is that when in my journey of transitioning from the PhD, you know, as a PhD graduate into the academic role, at the same time, one of my peer from the PhD cohort was making the same transition, and he also landed in Maryland in a faculty position. And because, you know, and we were part of the same, you know, doctoral cohort, and, you know, having been sort of in that group, you know, over the course of, you know, how many years that we were together in the program, it was interesting to see how we sort of both made that transition from being a PhD student to a first-year faculty member, and the dynamics that we had when we were part of the cohort in the PhD, you know, suddenly transformed as a result in part of both our transitional experiences from student to a faculty, and I think at this point it's still unraveling, because, you know, we are still in that process of trying to make sense of, you know, how did our group identity, you know, in that context morph into the current situation that we both find ourselves in, but yet in a way at an individual level. So I have to say at this point it's still something that I'm still trying to unravel and make sense of.
I mean, there seems to be a number of things at hand in the group dynamic piece, because of course people don't lose their own identity.
Right.
And so there's that individual identity and the group identity that are operating sometimes at odds and then sometimes in one. And that's a very exciting moment, I think, when that happens for groups. And Krister, you probably have had that experience with youngsters, which is really interesting. I know you've survived it and you look well. Let me just say, you look well for someone who spent so much time with middle schoolers. But similar to Craig, working with groups who need to find their identity and maintain their individuality is a struggle in many ways, and yet yields tremendous benefits if you can get there.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, what you're actually looking for there. So, yeah, a little bit lost in the question. Can you?
Just about the experience of working in groups with large, I don't know how large your groups were, but both of you have done a lot of work within the group dynamic.
Yeah.
And I think this gentleman would like to hear more about what works with groups and what kind of work you've done. Both of you, maybe come back to you.
Yeah, okay. So I think I shared a little bit about this earlier, you know, some of the interventions that come to my mind when we've had, I think of one group, we had a global group we brought to New York, to Long Island. We had about 50 people, and really broken group, you know, just really, not really a lot of hopefulness in this group. And, you know, pretty much spent about, I would say, a good 2/3 of the day getting them to a place through climate, really intense climate setting, using arts. We brought a musician in, we had them sort of creating stuff, some dialogue stuff, and then, you know, it took about, yeah, I'd say a good 4 or 5, 5.5 hours to really get the group to a place where they actually really could start to have some difficult conversations and really address the stuff that they were facing. And then, you know, by the end of the day, you know, it was interesting in the closing, people commenting on how they felt like, I mean, it was like a huge transformation in the group within 8 hours. But, you know, it like took 70 to 80% of the time to get them to a place of ripeness where they were really ready to shift. And so I think some groups, you crack them sooner, it takes an hour or two, you get some tough groups, and maybe, you know, that they're ready to loosen up after an hour, and then maybe some of the things you do as a facilitator help speed that up a little bit. And then, so depending on the challenge of the group, it can be a little different. I was thinking of another example. I was in Nairobi, Kenya, after some of the political violence, and in the United Nations they had a lot of intertribal issues going on in the duty station, and so there was a lot of conflict that was spilling into the office. And so we did some reconciliation and healing workshops with the staff there across tribal differences, and you know, it was amazing to see. And you know, it took about 2 to 3 days, but then by the 3rd day some real healing sort of kicked in. And so you know, I think from a group dynamics perspective, depending on the kinds of issues you're dealing with, the level of intensity, the history, but you know, I think you just have a belief and a faith that human beings will rise to the occasion when they're ready, and you just may have to sit with them for a while. Some of my colleagues, we did some work in Bosnia, and they were there for like 10 years, and it took, you know, having a 10-year window there working in post-conflict reconciliation, building partnerships that took years to build a level of trust to be able to start to really bring groups together and do some really powerful work. And so that's sort of, I think, you know, in terms of time frames, when you think about there in a post-conflict setting, you got to think in maybe 10-year windows. You know, you're working with a group in an organization that's been having trouble for a year or two, maybe a couple of days. You know, you're in a mediation with a couple people, maybe there's a couple of hours or sessions. But I mean, there's something about just being in that space and, you know, creating the climate and conditions for people to just, you know, build trust and get ready to engage and move into the more creative side of conflict. So I don't know if that addresses the question or.
It does. I mean, for many people, the reason they're part of a group may be a negative dynamic, right? They are the oppressed. They are the people that are not being treated right by the city government or whatever. And there are sometimes groups that are formed out of the positive. But helping people find that identity that offers opportunity for change, I would think is challenging, and can be challenging in any of your fields, whether it's from the academic, or it's day-to-day working with tribal communities. All of that group work, I think, presents its own challenges that are different than just the one-on-one.
But you know, in a way, it's interesting too, though, that conflict oftentimes becomes a vehicle with which to get to identity issues, which sometimes are otherwise harder to access. So there is a sort of other hidden opportunity that when you get into a conflict process with a group of people or individuals or whatever, it becomes this opportunity to do some deeper work, which otherwise you may not have an opportunity to get into. So it's kind of an interesting, you know, two-sided nature of the conflict. But so it's interesting. The identity is really a challenge, yet also it's like this vehicle that can really be the basis for transformation to happen. And when you get down to that level and do some identity work, it really can be at the core of what people are really facing as human beings. And so it's interesting, an obstacle and a way out in a new way if you can get there.
If you can get there, yeah. Anybody else want to chime in on that before we go to another question? Or
I'd love to talk about this a little bit. So my background is in corporate America, so getting to identity is not necessarily a reality from a day-to-day perspective. But one of the things that I've noticed is that learning about identity or about how to manage conflict actually has an impact on the corporate setting as well, just on working on projects and trying to get ideas through. And I think the biggest take, it's interesting because after I got out of the program, or even when I was in the program, I was automatically applying skills. So going through mediation, for example, led me to a different approach in how I was managing projects. And interesting, I wasn't talking about it, but it was interesting to see that the response from people was that they felt like they were heard, and projects went better, people wanted me on the team, so things like that. So I just wanted to bring that up.
Great, thank you. Yeah?
My question specifically for Michelle. You talked about your interest in sustainability and sustainable cities. How would you apply that to your negotiation and conflict resolution background?
Let me just repeat the question because not everybody could hear it. This was about Michelle's stated interest in sustainability, how that relates back to her work in the program at NECR.
I think it goes back to managing process and the being comfortable with the ambiguity question, because people are trying to explore what it means, what does sustainability mean, and is it environmental, is it social, is it financial, is it all of that? And once you start talking about all those things at the same time, then you have to talk about dynamical systems, right? And start thinking about things in terms of how does it all interconnect. So I would say that that was one piece of it that was very helpful. I think also taking the skills that you're learning in conflict resolution and applying it in different ways. So I work with a community garden, I work on a community advisory board, I work on a not-for-profit board, I work in production in advertising on the corporate level, and I don't know if that's specific enough. I mean, I'm happy to talk to you afterwards. I think what it comes down to is what we've all been saying, is that there's not a direct path. It's basically handing you a skill set and saying, okay, do what you want. And then you have to figure out what you want to do. And that's the difficult part.
I see 1 there, 2, and 3. And then I'll come to this with 4. Okay. Yeah, gentlemen there in the
So just
teal shirt.
from a professional perspective, thank you all for your presentations. I think it's a very diverse panel, but going back to Michelle's point about corporate America, but I think also from all your perspectives, how would you describe the kind of professional development of the field? Is conflict resolution field growing through much more kind of initiatives, innovation, self-consultancy that many of you kind of turn into and build? Or is there room for corporate America to actually embrace this as part of the academy, where RIA is actually going for a professional academic conflict resolution? I mean, where is the balance between, incorporating this kind of field into the business world of today? The bank, maybe, should you do you need to leave your job in the bank to actually be a practitioner, or, you see what I mean? Yeah, I'm not saying go back to bank.
No, and just so all of you here, there's no way I'm repeating the whole question, but it really was about, is there room in the corporate sector for this transition? And I think Alon was going to address some of that.
It's actually a very rich question, so it's a little bit hard to answer in a fell swoop, but in the previous question went to Michelle, I was just thinking in my head of different examples of what I've seen, and we have about 600 projects at launch per day in our site per day. When we started the company, we had 5 per month, right? And the diversity of what we see now is mind-blowing. And there was this one initiative in Detroit, and it was this block. Detroit has no money, basically, and they're starting to sell the real estate in the region. And there was this park, kind of a park. The community created this park, and the city said, we're going to sell it to this gentleman called Dan Gilbert, who runs Quicken Loans, and he's going to create a condo. Why you did that in Detroit is beyond me, but that's what he wanted to do. And they didn't want that to happen, but none of them individually had the ability to stop it. What they actually did is they went onto our platform, and they raised the funds to buy the property, and then they changed it, and that's their park. What's really interesting about it is the cleanest park in the whole entire city, because they all have ownership in it. And what happens then is the problem of the commons gets suddenly resolved because it's going back to that old small town community sense where everybody's a part of it. And that starts going at a wider and wider scale. And at one point, corporate America started taking an interest in what we were doing. And we're partnered with, kills me, but we're partnered with Goldman Sachs, Morgan Stanley, Citibank, American Express, and those kinds of guys. And everybody's like, why? What the hell is the reason for working with those kinds of guys? And we really are saying to them, you have something that's valuable. Why don't you start leveraging that? So this is not about sponsoring something. It's honing in on what do you have that people want? What are you comfortable with sharing? Let's create a rich experience out of it. So American Express works with us to help small businesses raise funds on our system and then grow their business. Why do they like it? It's because those people eventually going to need American Express small business cards. But we make them actually give something up. And they're very uncomfortable doing, but that's okay. You know, it's not wrong to do that. They are trying to run themselves as a business, but we're able to hone in on what's the value of it. So then what happens in that scenario is, how can I work with those kinds of groups if I want to, and how do I get them ready to actually open up and do things with us? And it's not always possible. You can't really force it, but sometimes you just have to put them in uncomfortable situations where they don't necessarily have a choice but to work with you, and then get actually used to the fact that, hey, this is actually a good thing. There's a lot of resistance. And what we then do is we just empower the people on the other side and basically give them all the credit, make them feel like they're part of the process, and just basically kiss the ring. And once that happens, and suddenly they get really into it, and they feel like it's their idea, even though it actually isn't. Lest we tell ourselves, feel better. But things actually happen slowly. Michelle and I were talking about this earlier before the panel, about a situation that we have now with Morgan Stanley that our company's working with, and they're using us to enhance their diversity issue. And I told them the solution is to hire more diverse people. It's really that simple. But that's not how they can do things. So they said we need to show that we're doing this, and maybe we'll actually do it. But we want people to feel like we care. So what we then do is we try to what we then do is we take that concept and we basically let it be. You can't just make people feel like you care. We're gonna put you in a position where you have no choice but to care. And they don't always realize that until the very end. And then there's a moment of frustration, and then after that, you got it. And then they're stuck in it for a while. And we have a television show coming out about this in the fall. They're following the projects from our company, and now you have, the Morgan Stanley episode. They love it, and they're stuck now. And we're going to be doing some initiatives, but that's as close as a quick answer I can give you. It's hard to do. It takes a lot of time, and you got to defer the appreciation value to a whole other group of people in order to make that actually happen.
I'm actually wondering what you think about language, because talking about conflict resolution in a corporate setting means something different. I'm a producer. What do producers do? Conflict resolution on a daily basis. But we don't talk about it that way. No one understands it. And no one's that interested in trying to put those two things together. So it's figuring out that that if you're managing an online community, like I think is what you're doing, Enid, right? A little bit, yeah. Somewhat. Those community managers are conflict resolution practitioners, but they don't call themselves that.
Yeah. And I think technology too has really increased accountability for corporations and for governments, and I think innovations like crowdfunding and social media are really putting those issues to the forefront of conversations more so than ever before, in such a rapid amount of time. And I know, like at the UN right now, these buzzwords of sustainability and partnerships, like I hear that word partnerships all the time, especially in regards to these post-2015 development goals. As the MDG deadline is coming up, the UN is now ramping up these efforts to get more people involved in shaping these goals, which they didn't before. I mean, they just basically got in a room and created these goals that all, every member state has to now fulfill. But now they're getting business involved, they're getting civil society involved. They want everyone to at least feel like they have a seat at the table in shaping the goals for the next 30 years. So, I think it's definitely a conversation or a dialogue that is more public and more visible than ever before, and I think there's a space for that, even within corporate America, within civil society, within intergovernmental bodies that I probably wasn't there 10 years ago. So whether you are interested in being a practitioner in conflict or just observing conflict and on an academic or researching conflict from a communications aspect of really showcasing people who are on the ground or conducting programs that deal with conflict situations. Like in either way, like there's definitely space there, and there are more channels to really display or show your work, whether it's the impact of the work you do on the ground, or it's from a corporate sense how you can do your business and what you do to help the community and society. So
I had
just one more question.
one more question. Oh, I'm so sorry, but if you're coming to the thing afterwards, you can ask for it. I know I had pointed to you, and I know I pointed to you, and I know I pointed to you, and I see 5 hands. Let's just go with you, and then.
Oh, no. Oh, sure.
I'd like to thank you for an excellent presentation. And I think that the knowledge of conflict resolution is a very sustainable skill. And especially in our global world today where there's conflict everywhere, and there are children that are bullies, and anything you can think of has a resolution. I wanted to know if you had to articulate the 4 things that you've learned that you feel the most valuable in your studies and your practice of conflict resolution. What would you like to share with us?
4? I'll share a couple. So I've been talking a little bit about the whole idea of the climate setting. So I think in all my interventions, I think one of the big learnings I've had is just really around creating the space and really working that and doing a lot of work on that. I like this quote by Keegan who says, many conflicts may not be so much about us resolving them, but rather about them resolving us. And so I think there's something really, just this sort of, the process of conflict is very humanizing and transformational if we allow that to happen, and if we can really shift the focus on changing the other to really discovering ourselves. I think that's really where it gets interesting and exciting. So that'd be a second one for me. I don't think about a couple more, but I think what's awesome about this field is it really pushes us to be creative and innovative. Like you go in with a bunch of tools, but you never know how it's going to play out. And that's what kind of makes it so exciting, because it's, the breakthrough may happen in this group this way and another one with that way. And so I think being creative, not being afraid to try things and experiment, do the things tend to work. And then I always like to go into every intervention trying out 1 or 2 things that I'm not sure how it's going to play out, and just I always call them the wild card, part of the intervention. So I want to try something I've never done before to keep pushing myself. So I think that's been a big thing for me, is just about risk taking and experimenting, and you're dealing with real people, so obviously in a respectful way. But I think that this field requires innovation, and then the other thing the 4th one for me would be about really using a range of modes, from dialogue to arts to even going for a walk with somebody can change the mode, and just using all sides of the brain and cognitive and emotional. But that's sort of maybe a quick 4 I can put out for you.
Sure. So for me, it's about process. It's no longer about specific outcomes. I mean, obviously, in a corporate setting, you have specific outcomes in mind. So changing that mindset, I think it's the move, in my mind, to systems, and then the reframe, and being self-aware.
Well, I can only think of two, I'm sorry. But I will actually echo Michelle's last point. The self-awareness piece was definitely high on my list in the sense that, you know, taking the skills and the knowledge from the program as it relates to conflict resolution and negotiation and such, I think that's something that, you know, as I apply it, you know, in my current role, whether in the professional life as well as the personal life, I think it's this constant, you know, need to be aware of, you know, my own competencies and my own assumptions, my own, you know, things that we often talk about, you know, in the courses, in classes, but I think we don't practice enough, and having to actually use it on a continuous and ongoing basis, especially, you know, once you're out of that student role and in your everyday life, professionally or otherwise, you know, that constant sort of reminder to look within yourself and just think about, okay, how am I going to apply this? You know, how does this work with some of the models and the theories that I learned in class? Does this work in this specific context? Why does it not work in a specific context? What am I missing? So it's that constant, you know, sort of internal dialogue that I have with myself in terms of trying to apply, you know, what we learned in the program, whatever program, conflict-related program you are in within the Columbia network, to, you know, the various facets in your lives.
Great, thank you. I don't know if I have four, but two, like definitely the self-awareness. One practical thing that I definitely remember getting from the program was this concept of listening. Active listening, which when I first heard it was like, really? But then, but then when practicing it, you realize how difficult it is to actually listen to somebody and how difficult it is for other people to do the same. And on a personal and professional level, just being aware of that and consciously listening during times of either heated conflict or just, you know, an interaction has changed dramatically the way I've interacted with coworkers, with friends, with family. I feel like that was such a huge takeaway, and it seems like such a simple concept, but one of the most difficult things to actually practice on a day-to-day basis. And generally, the idea of stories, and both that people, you tell stories to yourself about how things have evolved and how things can be resolved, as well as just stories in general of how conflicts have developed, and that's helped me in, you know, trying to shape messaging around what the organization I work for does, how we, you know, shape communications about the issues that we cover, you know, outside of development. You know, a lot of people really don't understand what's involved in that. So the stories that, you know, organizations tell about themselves, the stories that individuals tell about themselves, the stories that we tell, like to ourselves and to other people, I think being aware and conscious of and realizing what's at play and how the dynamics of that has definitely helped me both on a personal and professional level. It's really just kind of opened, I guess, my lens in wider than it definitely was before I studied it.
I'll be brief. Awareness is the one I had, but you know, I was the last one, so it's no longer original. But I mean, besides that point, I mean, just to bring some flavor. My undergrad I did economics and Chinese and quantum mechanics. So I love quantifying stuff. I love it. And I went to this program after doing finance, which is again quantifying things. And I was in Peter's class, and I told him, this is fluffy. I don't like it. This is fluid. Like, what is this? Like, come on, we want to hold hands and sing everybody. It's ridiculous. The only other people in the program who felt the same way were the lawyers. No surprise there. And it took me a really long time to take a step back and actually accept that it's not that simple. I still have problems accepting it's not that simple, because that's just who I am innately. I mean, I was born in Holland. We run in Germanic time. It's so taking that shift, it was culturally very tough for me. But what I learned from that is that it's hard for me, it's hard for other people as well. And when you start keeping that in mind, the concept of patience kind of changed for me. I used to see patience as a negative in the sense of I have to wait for someone else to catch up. And instead now it was, I need to give the time and energies for everybody to kind of get to the same place at the same time. That was a big transformation for me. And looking at this from the academic point, I wish everybody sat in a room and said, how do you feel? And I'm going to tell you how I feel. I mean, it doesn't happen like that. It eventually, with the right environment, you'd be surprised people are capable of doing. But to get to that point, you might never get to that point. And within what I do, I don't always have the time to get to that point. So you have to kind of pick and choose what you accomplish. But at the end of the day, I wish everybody had a therapist, and I wish everybody took a course in conflict. That'd be fantastic. And the problem with that is bifold, right? One is people don't understand what conflict resolution is, and there's a huge stigma around the field of psychology, unfortunately. And so that you're dealing with that as well, and you have to kind of come over that. So it's basically accepting that life is not perfect. Am I the dark one here?
Actually, you've been very positive. I think you can all understand why this group was selected to speak with you. It's a wonderful, fascinating group. I feel a little cheated that we have to leave and go now to have some refreshments, though it's lovely that we are. But you're all so interesting and have so much to offer, and I thank you so much for being a part of this.